All right, first I want to ask you a question. How close are we to Antarctica exactly? Because I admit my geography for this part of the world is a little vague, but I'm certainly feeling the closeness this morning.
But it actually snowed up north of us, which is closer to the equator, in case you didn't realise.
I'm sure I see why that I should be thankful for that. Yeah, oh God.
We've got frost now, but it's going to get lovely and warm a little later in the morning.
You promise. That'll happen before my 3 o'clock flight, right? 4 o'clock flight, whatever it is. I'm in that state of travel where I really don't know what day it is, what time it is, what season it is, or anything. But speaking of questions, it occurred to me that I've been asking you all an awful lot of questions, and I've never really given you an opportunity to ask me any questions. And so I was thinking if we have a little time at the end, maybe we could have a bit of Q&A kind of exchange. So in this final session, what I'd like to do is return us to the sphere of action. So what are the implications of the things that we've said so far for how we live in the world? What does it mean to live authentically in the world? So here we go. Let's start with an easy question. Since you first encountered the Franciscan Way or the Third Order, what is one change that you have made that has simplified your life? Just one change that you've made that simplified your life. And you probably don't need a lot of time to think about that, so what do you think? Something that you've done might be in the simplicity part of your rule or not? Yes?
For me, it wasn't actually my beginning of my Franciscan journey. It was going and living in Vanuatu for 6 years in a different country. And I came back and my whole materialistic values changed.
Oh. Okay, so can you tell me what Vanuatu is like? When do we leave? I'm sorry, it was what?
One of our Pacific Islands, and I could say it's like third world in one sense.
Okay.
So, yes, but you learn to live very simply.
Okay.
Just coming back, I took 12 months to decide whether I should buy a car because was I getting too materialistic.
Yeah.
That felt so picture, so it was a sort of a gentle entry into.
So going to another place where the standard of living is not quite so high, it can definitely affect how you decide to live even when you come back to a place where it is higher. I've had that experience too. When I once took a group of I do these study abroad programs, and the first one I did was I took a group of students to Zimbabwe and South Africa, and we stayed for 3 months. And the students really struggled with it. And, our focus was on sustainable development, so we were constantly going to places where they were trying to make things work and having to struggle against the odds, And so that really changed me in a similar kind of way. I mean, I came back, and one thing I said was, I'm never going to whine again about how slow my internet connection is. And you know how those resolutions go. It didn't take that long. But it did definitely give me a different awareness. Yeah. What else? What have you done to simplify your life?
I think it's just the discipline of keeping the rules somehow, gave me structure.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of those superfluous things go away.
That's a great answer. So the rule provides a structure that simplifies kind of the living of your spiritual life or your life, because let me elaborate on this, and you can tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth. For me, at least, I find that having a certain set of things that I'm supposed to do keeps me from running around wondering if there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. Not to mention having the community to support that, right? And so, yeah, that's lovely, the rule itself. Yes. There was somebody else with a hand up kind of just behind. Yeah.
I changed jobs.
You changed jobs.
Which resulted in less pressure, a drop in income, slightly huge things.
Yeah. Actually, this is a moment to share what I was going to say, which is that I decided as an academic not to pursue tenure. And do you have the tenure system here? All right, so professors. So in the American system, if you're going for tenure, which is a job for life, unless you commit a federal offense or something, you have 6 years in which to produce lots and lots and lots of research. You get judged at that point, and it's an up or out system. So after 5 years, you are either promoted with tenure or you're fired. And so I was, it's an insane time. People who are trying to get tenure they don't sleep. They wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. It's a terrible, anxiety-ridden time. And when I was pursuing that, I remember having a meeting with my faculty mentor, who was saying to me, you're doing okay, you're getting some stuff out, but you should be aiming at getting stuff into the top 3 sociology journals. And people talk about that moment when they go to prison, when they hear the doors clang shut behind them and they feel trapped. It was that kind of moment. And I thought, oh my God, I so don't give a damn about publishing in those journals. I just don't. And I can imagine spending the rest of my life acting like I did care. And I thought, no, I can't do this, And I also kind of began to realize that I hadn't been living like somebody who was trying to get to that goal. And so I'd been getting up in the morning and wasting a lot of time, staring into space, gawking at God, as they say, and not really making so I'd already kind of made the choice not to have tenure. So it was kind of a case of, do I really want the status? Do I really need the salary? Do I really need the security that tenure brings? Or could I accept being a second-class citizen in the academy and have a bit more freedom? And so that was the deal I made. And I have to tell you, it was not an easy one. I'd like to say, it was such a Franciscan thing. And after that, I just went dancing along the lanes, playing air violin and singing love songs in French, like Francis. But it didn't happen. It's been a struggle, because the thing is that every day that I go into work, I'm in that place where I have decided to be second-rate. And I'm surrounded by people who absolutely value being first-rate. And so, but that's the deal. But I have to say, it has paid off in the freedom to do things like this, which I value so much more. So anyway, so that's my piece. But what else have you done that has simplified? Yes?
I felt that my private spirit development, I could share, I could develop and bring out in the open and find people who I recognize and say the spirit development.
Okay.
Could find my place somewhere.
So you found the ability to have more relationship, to share more with others.
Yeah.
But what change did you make that made that possible?
By basically finding a long search over years that basically brought me here, and where I found people that I can share, feel I am valued for my spirit development, where that is not something strange, but something acceptable.
Oh yeah. Definitely. I mean, I can connect to that, because coming here, even though I'm a foreigner, I feel that these are my people, and the people who I share certain assumptions with, I don't share an accent with, but in a spiritual sense, we all kind of have the same accent, and so actually, I feel a sense of belonging here that I often don't feel at home in a more kind of secular surrounding. So yeah, definitely. One more, some change that you've made. Yes.
Taking seriously that we need to be under spiritual direction.
Oh yeah. Okay. So spiritual direction, having that be a requirement and expectation. Yes. So how is that made for more simplicity?
I found it very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The first one or two I had were very experienced. I was living in a city. But when I went to a small place, they weren't experienced, and I wanted to argue with them. And it was very humbling, because it's not right, but then I didn't think they were right either. I'm under spiritual direction with a very experienced person, and it is so different.
Oh, okay.
I'm willing to listen.
Yeah.
And that is helpful. But I think it's also a change in me.
Yeah, spiritual direction. That's something that I didn't really do before I started into formation in the Third Order, and it's such a gift. Spiritual direction and retreat are two of the biggest gifts in the rule, because they're permission to take time for myself in a way that, otherwise, that our culture doesn't really define as necessary. You should be doing something else, So, but Teresa of Avila complained bitterly about some of her spiritual directors, and So I feel for her, and I've been fortunate in mine, but I can only imagine what it would be like to be under the direction of somebody who just didn't get it.
I actually used to get angry with one of them.
Yeah.
Fortunately, he left the town, so I could get
Well, getting angry with your spiritual director could be healthy for both of you. All right. Well, so here is a slightly more challenging question. What is one thing in your life that might change if you were to live more from your authentic self? One thing in your life that might change if you were to live more from your authentic self. And just volunteer as soon as you've thought of something.
My income might go down.
Yes, because?
I wouldn't be so obsessed about having money for security and all that.
Okay. So it might mean making decisions that would affect your income adversely. Yeah.
And my bank balance.
And your what?
Bank balance.
And your bank balance, yeah. I must have already made those decisions because mine is a mess. Actually, because of our calendar, the day I get back, I'm going to get my first paycheck in 3 months, and it's just like I'm doing an international trip with nothing in the bank. That's interesting. Is this possible? Yeah. Sure, if you land on somebody who provides everything for you. My esteemed hostess wouldn't even allow me to pay for lunch the other day, and Robin insisted on paying for it. But I think it's traditionally it's the guest who's supposed to do that. Yes.
I'd probably sell my house and go into community and more likely do conversion.
Oh.
I was actually doing work
Interesting.
with others sharing resources.
So you would sell your house and begin living in community in a way that would probably drastically simplify your life. Yeah, that would be a huge step. I would imagine that it would take a certain process of discernment to get to the point where you're ready to make a step like that. Yeah. What else? Sorry?
Doesn't necessarily simplify your life living in community.
Well, it can. Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, I have had enough experience of it to say that it can certainly introduce new complexities. Yes. I mean, you may. You have to have a bike to sell. Yes, I recommend you stock up on bikes before you take it, or anything like that.
I did downsize the car.
Yeah. Well, no, but seriously, you can get rid of a lot of stuff and move into a small space, and then have all kinds of complex interactions that create a whole new, set of things to deal with. But and that's why things. This is why I said that simplicity is so complex. From the beginning, I was saying that because things that look like they'll be simplifying sometimes don't end up that way, or they might have complexities of their own that you just end up having to deal with. Anybody else think of anything? Yes?
Yeah, I would say, let my yes be yes and my no be no. And that might offend some people.
Yeah.
I think that means opening your heart and say what you really think or believe.
Yeah. Letting your yes be yes and your no be no would be simpler, wouldn't it? But then, of course, you have to deal with the consequences of that and how other people respond to you. Actually, as I was thinking about this question, that's kind of the direction I was going. I was thinking I would be more direct about things, and not. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day, my style of conflict is to simply, be nice, yes, and then when I've had enough, I just nuke the person. And if I would say at the time that something bothers me, look, this kind of bothers me. Could we talk about it? then, I would never get to the point of nuking people. And I have to say, it doesn't happen often anymore, but it has happened. Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. Francis and Claire modeled for us lives that were simplified down to the one thing that was necessary, and that's that intense focus that I talked about earlier on. But, as 21st century third order people, we can only follow their modeling so far because we have a different vocation in a different time. And so a lot of things are unchanged about the world since Francis' day. There's still plenty of greed and human selfishness around the profit motive and all the rest of the stuff. The things that Justin was pointing out yesterday that seemed to say that, we're kind of in the same world that they were in a lot of ways. And I appreciated his point about how strongly that suggests that we Franciscans still have a lot to say to the world. But some things are different. And so let's consider a few challenges to simplicity that Francis and Claire might not have had to deal with, or at least might not have had to deal with in the way that we do. So first, let's talk about time. Now, obviously, Francis and Claire lived in time, but I think people in the Middle Ages were not quite as driven, by the lash of the clock as many of us are today. I won't say that we all are. There are the people who are retired, who I at least like to fantasize have plenty of time on their hands, although that may just be me. Okay, so the retired people are all doubled over laughing, right? I'm sure my parents would be too. And having visited Andrew's community yesterday, I for 30 minutes or whatever it was, an hour, I would love to look at them and say, gosh, they look like people who aren't at the mercy of time. They seem to have this wonderful, idyllic existence, which I imagine is just another one of my little fantasies. But maybe they are more. Maybe they have a better relationship to time than I do. I don't know. But you've heard the expression, time is on my side. I almost never feel that way. For me, time is the enemy. Time and I are locked in this battle, where it's always trying to get the best of me and I'm always trying to triumph over it. And do you feel like this, or is this actually paradise, as I've come to suspect? Is this a sense that some of you have as well? That you're constantly having to fight against time? This is a real battle for me. It's a real struggle. I've already kind of mentioned that I feel like oftentimes like I never have enough time. It's funny, my husband is even worse at this than I am, although if he were here speaking, he would tell you the opposite. But the truth is we're both pretty bad about thinking that we can fit into a given interval of time a lot more than is at all realistic. And so here's what a typical Sunday morning looks like in our house. So my husband goes through his Sunday morning liturgy, which involves staying in bed late and reading the newspaper, and at this time of year likely involves football on television. And so for me, of course, it involves church, and I get up, early, well in advance of the time I need to leave. And so what happens is I think, I don't have to be there for hours. I could write an exam. I could grade a few papers, I could start a new chapter, I could, clean out the garage, what could I do, with all this wonderful things? So then I get immersed in some project, and I look up and I realize that there's 20 minutes till I have to leave, and I'm at least 45 minutes from being ready. And I just go, oh my gosh, how did that happen? Like every week! And I just don't know why I keep doing this. And fortunately, the people in my parish are pretty forgiving and not terribly judgmental when I roll in, sometime before the creed. It's terrible. And I just don't know, but C.S. Lewis said something about this. I don't know exactly where it was. I think maybe it was in the Screwtape Letters. But he said, it's weird how humans are constantly being surprised by time. So we have all these expressions like, is that the time? Where did the time go? Gosh, it's October already. We had a whole month of September. So it really should not come as such a surprise that it's October now, but it does it every year. Christmas, like, oh my God, it's already time to get ready for Christmas every year. And so, so C.S. Lewis says, maybe, he's just kind of speculating a bit, maybe it's because we're sort of not really made for time. Maybe we're kind of foreigners in time. And we're sort of, having a little sojourn here in time, but we're really sort of wired for eternity. I don't know. It's kind of a nice thought. I think that the Sabbath was given to God's people as a message early on that we have got to put some boundaries around time, or we will become its slaves. I don't try to take a day off. I don't try to consider Sunday a Sabbath because, to be honest, any day that I have to get up, pull myself together, and be somewhere is not a day of rest. But and I'm sure the clergy in this room will relate to that. But I try to take another day off a week. I'm not always really good about it. But I think we have got to have some boundaries, or we will become the slave of time. And God is all about bringing us closer to freedom, and not allowing us to be enslaved by things. And that's why this commandment, take a day off, was such a mercy, such a mercy. So speaking of time, what about screen time? What I mean by screen time? Like how much time you spend in front of one kind of screen or another? Screen time, yeah. One thing that Francis and Claire did not have to contend with was the seduction of communications technology. Oh, yeah. Claire had a very important relationship with a woman called Agnes of Prague. Yeah, who, like Claire, was a noble woman who had renounced everything, including an offer of marriage from the emperor, in order to follow Jesus completely. And so they had this correspondence. They exchanged letters, but it seems that we only have about 4 letters from Claire to Agnes, and we don't have the letters that Agnes wrote back. But it seems like they had a relationship that was fairly important, but there wasn't a lot of toing and froing. They kind of carried it out in a few letters. Can you imagine if that correspondence had been going on today? Okay, so they would have been emailing daily at least. There would be, Facebook posts, instant messaging, they'd be tweeting, there'd be Skype and FaceTime and all this kind of stuff, and it'd just be like this constant chatter, because that's how we do communication these days. Although maybe the two of them were grown up enough to have been able to resist that. But I use the term seduction very deliberately because all that technology, all that communication stuff does have a real come hither feel to it, like come check your email. There might be something important there, Come look at Facebook. Maybe somebody's posted something interesting, Come check your email because it may be that you have a message from one of your teaching assistants that all hell's broken loose and there's something you need to do, or check your sales on Amazon. See if anybody's buying your books today. It's like really, seductive. And, so it's okay, so time for another true confession. If confession is good for the soul, I'm going to be in great shape after this convocation, after all these confessions I'm making. There's a kind of state that you can slip into. And C.S. Lewis wrote about this too. He talked about, obviously he didn't have all this stuff, but he talked about reading the newspaper in a way where you're not really reading, you're not really doing anything productive, but you're also not really resting, where you kind of just idly flip back and forth from one page to another, looking at the obituaries and the advertisements and scanning the pages, but not really reading it and not really relaxing. It's kind of like slipping into neutral and just kind of idling there. And so I can slip in, this is my confession, I can slip into that state and be sort of like flipping back and forth between email and Facebook. Oh, I wonder while I've been looking at Facebook, has somebody sent me an interesting email? And then back and forth, and it's just like, what am I doing? Just shut it all down and go outside and play, So I'm guessing that there's variation in the degree to which people in this room are caught up in this. Because probably some of you don't do any of this stuff, or you don't do Facebook, or maybe you have email, but you don't really look at it but once a week or something. But you're not off the hook. You're not off the hook. So don't get too smug. Because it might be something else. It might be television, or it might be radio. Confession number 2 for today. Radio is a big one for me because if I'm driving or if I'm cooking, there's a temptation for me to just switch on the radio and see what's going on, And I've really been working on this lately. I've been kind of working on all this stuff lately, but I have this new rule where I don't turn it on unless there's something that I know is coming on that I really want to hear. But there's no sort of turning it on and then just letting it be whatever it is. It's got to be more intentional than that. And so either I'll have silence, or I'll have something else like I sometimes listen to lectures or sermons or things that will be actually edifying, but no more zoning out to it. Zoning out is not a really good state. So I wonder if any of you have had to. This could not have been more perfectly timed. Thank you. We actually planned that beforehand. It involved this really complicated scheme whereby someone was supposed to call at a particular moment. I wonder if any of you have made similar kinds of efforts to limit your use of technology, whether it's, I personally refuse to have anything to do with Twitter. I just, you've got to draw the line somewhere, and I draw it there, but yes.
Because I live on my own, and I like to watch the news, I've taken to playing computer games while I do things. And so, because you might want to hear it, but you don't need to look at it.
Right, yeah.
And then somebody told me they'd wiped all their computer games off their computer because they were on it too much, and I thought, what a good idea. So I have 2 days a week where I actually don't turn my computer on unless I know that someone might be sending me an email. I thought they were right, you needed to simplify.
Yeah, it's some people have talked about it as an electronic fast. Yeah, not a bad idea. Yes?
I don't give anyone my mobile phone number.
Oh, I love that.
Give them my love.
That's clever. That's very good. I used to love, the smartphones are too smart for me, but I have one anyway because my husband bought me one on the day it came out, and it's like, this is the whole thing of being married to somebody who's not that into simplicity. But the thing about the phones now is that if you call someone, they have your number forever. If they want it, they've got it. Oh, you can block it, can't you? Yeah. So yeah. Maybe I need to figure that out.
I don't know anything about this.
I don't know the number off by heart.
You don't know your own number? Yeah, right. Well, why would you? You don't call it, do you? Yeah.
Well, I tell everybody at the meetings like this.
Oh, you just don't know? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know it. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yes.
I get things coming up on my computer screen that say, so-and-so wants to be your Facebook friend. And I think, I didn't know that.
Oh, I know. I hate that.
And so I don't do Facebook.
Yeah.
But then so many of my family in the younger generations do that alone, and they don't send letters and they don't ring up. And so if I want to get information, I have to go to my daughter-in-law and find out what the news is on that member of the family.
I think if I actually got a real letter in my mailbox, I would hit the sidewalk like a fish. I would just be flattened by that because I never get letters anymore. But the thing about it is that the reason that we don't stop, the reason that we, those of us who do use Facebook don't just give it up altogether is that there are things about it that can be valuable. If it were just completely useless, we'd give it up, right? But the thing is that for me, what I've found valuable about Facebook is that I went to a lot of schools growing up because we moved a lot. And the school that I went to in Rome was the only one where I had friends that I still cared about that I figured I would never see again, because how do you get a reunion when people live all over the world? And but Facebook has made it possible for me to reconnect with people I really did want to know what happened to them. And so it's been really fun for that purpose, as well as finding a lot of Franciscans and having a bit of kind of online community there. So the problem is there's just enough that's good about it that I don't want to reject it altogether. But then there's just a lot of crap as well, and so you have to sort of sift a bit. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the delete button. We are good. We're like this. We're close. Yes?
The idea is to have a grandchild who will go on Facebook for you and get pictures, whether they get pictures of your great-grandchildren on it when you come along like that.
Yeah. Then you don't have to do it yourself. That's right, because they're the only ones who can figure out the latest change to Facebook, which makes me crazy. Because as soon as I think I know how to do it, then they change something about it. And so yeah, you have your grandchildren do it. I'm starting to believe that the whole thing of having children, what we're actually doing is a kind of agriculture where we're raising, creatures that can deal with our technology for us.
I don't think that our information technology of today is a problem in itself. I think it's like any other technology. I've been known to hide away in a book, very often, in fact. And I think there are great things about Facebook. For instance, you can pass on your Amnesty International petitions and things like that.
Yes.
You can give links on there to your friends to something that you've found that's really useful, really edifying, or really fun, or informative, or whatever. So I think it's just another thing that you need to discipline yourself to use helpfully, or sometimes just for fun, but as part of a balanced life.
Yeah, it's like any other, these are just tools, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you can take a hammer and nails and you can build a shelter for a homeless person, or you can take a hammer and nails and build an oven and cremate people.
Yes, exactly.
They're just tools, So I think you're right to suggest that maybe we need a deeper examination of what we're doing. So, it's easy to kind of look at the electronic stuff and say, I long for the day when people read books, and then just escape into, and I'm not saying that you do this, but like escape into romantic fiction or like trashy novels or what have you, and still be doing kind of the same things, only be really smug about how you're not, you're untouched and untainted by all that stuff that the kids are into, So,
Susan, but just a few months ago, I actually went looking for that bit in the Screwtape message about time, because there was something, I can't
oh
remember.
yeah, so was it there?
For EFM I wanted to bring up, and C.S. Lewis says, he's writing as the devil, one of the devils, called Screwtape, I think, he says that humans have this funny idea that time is their own.
Oh, that too.
We've got to encourage this, he says.
Yeah.
It's one of our best tools is to encourage these silly little instincts to think that time is their own. And of course it belongs to the enemy, God. But we have to stop them at all costs from realising that all their time actually really belongs to God. And if they have one little bit of time that they're allowed to go and do something for themselves, they should be thankful if a slave is
That's right. And I mean, we often are told this about money, that, it's all, you're holding it, you're a steward of it, you're not the owner of it, I don't know when you do your stewardship fundraising campaigns around here, but we do them like this time of year, so when I go back, there's going to be like sermon after sermon about money. But we don't get told the same thing about time. And so it's easy to have a kind of entitlement mentality about it, and feel like it all belongs to us. So the thing about technology is, it's not that all of the stuff that we communicate these ways are trivial and pointless. It's that, that some of it's meaningful, and so we keep it, but then we have to, as I said, filter out the trivial, pointless stuff. It's kind of like, if you're an alcoholic and, you kind of go with the prevailing model of recovery, it's all about abstinence, right? It's not about moderation. And so you make the decision, a terribly difficult decision, to just give it up forever, right? But if your drug is food, that's not so simple. You can't just decide, I'm going to renounce food forever, Otherwise, if you do, forever is going to be quite short. So, it's like having a dragon at your door. Killing it is really hard, but taming it is harder. So I think that that figuring out how to manage that constant, kind of lure of being in touch is a real challenge for us that perhaps Francis and Claire didn't have. And I think one of the reasons that it's important to try to do this is because all of that stuff creates monkey chatter. Chatter, chatter, chatter in our heads, so that when we want to focus, it can be hard to do so because there's all that chatter going on. And so, another thing that I think that is a challenge to us that was not so much for Francis and Claire is globalization. Not that there wasn't a full globe in those days, but and not that people didn't move around, as Justin was pointing out yesterday. They certainly did. But the thing about the global connections that we have nowadays is that my neighbor isn't just the leper in my community. It's all the lepers in the world. And that thought can be paralyzing. When I think about, that I would guess it's probably the same way here, but we're constantly being sent all kinds of requests for help for people all over the place, right? You get all that stuff here, so it's the refugees in this country and the natural disaster victims in that country and the people with this disease in some other place or at home or what have you. And it just goes on and on and on. And so, at a certain point, you can kind of go, all right, I obviously can't respond to all of these needs, so I'm going to have to be somewhat selective, and I'm going to have to listen for the call on my life and my resources to what exactly am I supposed to contribute and where. But part of the challenge is, at what point do I get to have something for myself? So if I go out and buy myself a $3 cup of coffee that I could have made for $1 at home or less, is that really bad? Like, have I sinned somehow? Have I been unloving? Have I failed to love my neighbor if I spend something on myself? Like, where do you draw that line? It's very difficult. It's a moving target.
It's free trade. You've helped your neighbor.
If it's fair trade, I've helped my neighbor. Right.
But also, if I don't spend, then I'm denying somebody else a job or a living.
That's a really good point. If you don't spend, then you're denying somebody else a living. And I mean, so that doesn't mean we don't need to be somewhat discerning about what we spend on, because some jobs, maybe don't need to be supported, like, spending on weapons. I assume that's not what you were thinking. Yeah, exactly. But when I took my group of students to Zimbabwe, my husband and I were staying with a couple who are friends of ours who were from there, and they had a whole domestic staff, and my students were very disparaging about that. oh, they live in comfort. They have these people looking after them while other people around them are, starving and dying of AIDS and all this stuff. But the thing is that they were providing jobs for those people. They were providing jobs for people who otherwise would have been starving and dying and all of that stuff. So, because, I'm sure you're aware that Zimbabwe is not exactly the most economically strong country in the world. So, so you're right. The way that we spend, the way that we, use our resources is not just about what charities we donate to, but how we spend and the kind of employment opportunities that we make possible.
One of my granddaughters took a course as a barista because her husband studied and they needed a little extra money.
I've always wanted to be a barista. Some days when I'm really burned out on my job, I fantasize about becoming a barista.
So when somebody buys a cup of coffee from her, that's helping her.
That's her job. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I picked up from you the 4 elements of what creates reality, which is information, money, time, and space, place. But what about the physical reality?
What do you mean?
That we live in, that we experience directly. I think that is a very important element of our awareness.
Are you talking about like the, environmental kind of considerations?
That really connects us to place here and now, and which involve the environmental and the physical dimension of life.
Yeah.
And all the discussions of what makes our world, that dimension often gets totally ignored. Our physical reality of the environment we live in, on which our physical body is made possible.
Yeah.
It's so often, erased out of the picture of this discussion.
Yeah, and Franciscans probably talk about our care for creation more than most people do. But I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that was really striking to me when I was with this group in Zimbabwe was when somebody, one of our speakers got up and said, and I don't know, I can't vouch for these numbers being exactly right, but he said that there's enough resources in the world for everyone to live on the level of Europeans, but for everyone to live on the level of North Americans would take 6 planets to sustain it. And and I just had one of those sort of reeling moments of thinking, this is part of it, and thinking about how we respond to that reality. That's a really tough challenge, but we have to talk about it. You're right.
I think that's an essential element that's often taken out of the discussion of time, money, information.
Yeah.
That our physical reality is based on the environment, on our physical resources.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's a good way of getting to what something that I wanted to talk about last before sort of wrapping things up, and that is, if we're supposed to love, everyone, it's paralyzing to think of that, right? Especially when it's not just the people in your sort of day-to-day kind of sphere, but potentially everyone in the world that we now have access to. How can we even think about doing that? And so I'd like to use an idea from a famous American writer, Cornel West. I don't know if that name will be familiar here somewhat. Okay, maybe to a few of you. Cornel West is kind of one of the preeminent American intellectuals of our day. He's an African-American academic who's a philosopher and also an ordained Baptist minister. And he is just one of these fire-breathing prophet types, And in his talks, he can go from Greek philosophy to rap music, popular culture and back, in the blink of an eye, and you're just kind of like, it's exciting. And so he's done a lot of books that have been really well known and well received. But one of the earlier ones that isn't that well known is called Prophetic Reflections. And in this book, he talks about what it means to love your neighbor. What is it that we're actually called to do, and how do we think about that? And it's a very concrete and I think quite helpful 3-step process. So let me just outline that quickly, and then we'll fold up. The major premise that it begins with is Imago Dei. image of God. In other words, a commitment to the idea that every human is made in the image of God. And West says, if you don't begin there, the rest doesn't follow. So it starts with that. And one of the things that I think is so attractive about Francis, and the reason that so many of us are attracted to his way, is that he'd never lost sight of that. He always saw that image in other people, whereas I think, for a lot of us, I often think, Christians are amazingly adept at not recognizing our own God. When we're face to face, and God comes to us in other people. So Imago Dei is where it all begins, but it doesn't end there. It goes then to analysis, and this is a piece that I think is not immediately obvious to a lot of Christians. Analysis. So, for instance, if you think about the people you love. Okay, so if somebody that can help us think about the people we're supposed to love, but we're not really sure we do. So, if somebody you love lost their job, or was getting divorced, and they came to you and they were agonizing over this and trying to figure out, one, they wanted to express their pain, and two, they wanted to figure out what happened, then what would you do? You wouldn't say, you've got this real victim mentality and you need to get over that and just take control of your life, You wouldn't say, it was an isolated incident. You're making too much of it. People like you are oversensitive about this kind of stuff. You wouldn't dismiss their pain. What you would do is you would take it seriously and you would make an effort with them to try to understand what happened. In other words, you would exercise some compassion. You would suffer with them. And you would use not only your heart, but your head to try to help them unpack what happened so that they could understand it and potentially be a little bit more strong in the future and able to avoid that kind of thing happening again. So in other words, he's saying that love includes a kind of an element of commitment intellectually to understanding people's troubles and not dismissing them. So, but understanding without action is pointless, right? You don't just leave it there. So faith without works is dead. There's that verse, and I can't remember. I want to say it comes from the Epistle of James, but that one about, it's no good if you have resources saying, oh, go on and be warm and filled and don't do anything about it. There's no love in that, right? So the final stage then is action. And so I love this way of thinking about love because for two reasons. One is what it boils down to is taking people seriously. And everybody in this room knows that love, the commandment to love our neighbor is not about working up good feelings about them. You don't need to be told that, but a lot of people who read Cornel West do need to be told that. But I love this idea of putting it into these three steps because what it highlights is that love is a discipline. It's a theological discipline in that it begins with Imago Dei. It's an intellectual discipline in that it involves this effort to analyze and understand what's going on with people. But it's also a practical discipline because it requires that we act. So, to wrap this up, I'm still, obviously, as I have demonstrated multiple times during the course of these talks, I'm still grappling with what it means to live simply and to live authentically in the world. I think Cornel West gives us a way to begin thinking about it, a way to kind of a little template or a little way to think it through. But in closing, what I'd like to do is just sum up kind of where we've been and what the lessons are about living simply in a complex world. So first of all, where we began was that living simply is actually a complex and challenging undertaking that is going to require that we bring both our hearts and our minds to it. Second, outer simplicity of life will be most authentic when it comes from an inner simplicity of the heart, of the self. Third, the simplifying of our inner selves is going to require a process of kenosis, of self-emptying, and that process can be pretty painful at times. But it's also joyful because it takes us closer to that purity of heart, that still point, that point vierge, from which we can know and see God. And so the more that process of kenosis empties out the rubbish within, the more space there is for that spiritual vacuum effect to draw the Spirit of God in. And so the more the rubbish goes, the more the Spirit enters until, we fill up and fill up and fill up. And what happens when we're full? We overflow. That's the point. That's the goal. When we have a more clear and honest sense, this is the fourth point, of who we are going to be able to live out of that authentic self. And our outward simplicity then becomes not something that's motivated by guilt or shame. Oh, I live in a first world country. Bad me, I must give to somebody somewhere. Not out of a sense of guilt and shame, but we'll live out of a sense of our true self, and it will be more of a natural outflow of who we really are. Instead of something that we try to do, it will be something that we just do because that's who we are. And I think that's the goal. So the more God works on us in these ways, the more we will authentically become those brilliant, radiant, transfigured people that we were created to be. And there's no shame and no guilt in that. So, I guess we have a few minutes for questions, if you have any that you've thought about. Anything you want to talk about at all? Just on anything. Yes?
Talking about a friend who was in need of help to do, say, consultation or something like that. I was up at the church earlier this morning, and on the wall there was a brass relief of Mary holding her big son in her arms. And immediately it came over me in a wash that this is happening in Syria a good deal at the moment. There are many mothers, not just there, of course, but in countries where children are dying of malnutrition, that is happening there too. And I felt that our prayers are urgently required for those mothers and those people in that situation. And I wondered if we could spend 30 seconds in praying, because we can't actually go there and say, pull yourself together, or whatever.
Right.
But perhaps we can pray for God's love and comfort for those mothers who are holding their children in their arms, dying of them.
Would you like to just lead us in that?
Could we just
Sure.
silently, in silence for 30 seconds, just hold them
For the mothers of the children who are grieving in Syria and elsewhere in the world, yes. Amen. What else would you like to talk about now? Yes.
I'd like to say about yesterday and to thank you for asking questions. I found session 3 very difficult. You asked the question of what is God saying to you, and I looked around and they're almost frantically scribbling. And when people started talking, they said all sorts of absolutely amazing things. And I sat here and I looked at my page and it was completely blank. Thank you for asking the question.
I really wondered about that session because, it was a little out there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It really has been a real challenge for me. And I'm just very grateful to you for asking the question. And I'm sorry I couldn't answer.
Well, I actually, the last thing that I wanted to say, so I'll make this the last thing that I say, but it doesn't need to be the last thing you say, because we started a little late, so I think we could take just a few more minutes. But the last thing that I wanted to say is that I'm acutely aware that I've raised more questions than I've answered. And that's because I have more questions than answers. But I hope that what all of you will do is continue these conversations. And I hope that my job wasn't to come and finish it. Because I don't think I did. I hope not. Yes?
I was struggling with your question of finding your authentic self. And I've sort of been thinking about it and trying to unpack that. I sort of feel that I'm a product of who's gone before, who's made me what I am. And I feel there's sort of like an underlying DNA that bubbles to the surface every now and again because there's been some brave ancestors of mine who have explored all sorts of things. And if I can get to that little core that produced me, then maybe that is my authentic self. But it's I don't know. I may be right on the thing.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the self is this mix of all kinds of things, including what's gone before and who's gone before. You know, where we come from, it's got to be one of the big components of that, as well as all of the experiences and relationships and interactions that we've had, you know, during our own lifetime. But I also think that there's this kind of kernel, and this is where sociology and I kind of part company. Because I do think that there's this essential kind of kernel of self that is entirely God's doing, you know. But that doesn't mean that those other parts of it aren't important, and actually doesn't mean that those other parts of it are not God's doing. They are. I mean, God gave us a particular line that we come from, and that matters a lot. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I just want to bring the attention to the nearly forgotten war in Afghanistan.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
The nearly forgotten war in Afghanistan and the people who were trying to establish peace there.
Yeah.
If you could pray to that.
Yeah, I think maybe in the course of our liturgy, maybe during the prayers of the people or something like that, we could mention that. Yeah. Yes?
Susan, it's time.
It's time to leave the stage, isn't it?
Let me just check